Hey, this is Michael Lindsay from Vital MX. We're out here at Fox Raceway today for the 2025 Yamaha YZ250F launch. This bike only has a couple minor tweaks, and if you watched our 450 video, this is gonna sound extremely familiar. Basically, this bike has a couple little ergo things. The foot peg mounts have been cut down. When they went to lower foot peg mounts, guys were standing on them. They changed the throttle tube, throttle housing a little bit, and the grip. But the actual performance changes in this bike are the front and rear suspension, the overall settings in them, the rear linkage has changed, the rear shock spring rate has changed as well, and just a couple little minor tweaks here and there. So what do we know about the YZ250F? As always, this thing is great low to mid. It has gotten better across the range, particularly coming into the update last year where they changed the airbox. It does pull a little bit better up top. It did lose a little bit of bottom compared to a 23 model. First impressions from the engine, even though there is no changes, I think the base map has slightly been tweaked because I remember the bike last year, I could tell the big airbox change hadn't been cleaned up. My 24 didn't run super clean off the bottom. It was a little gurgly at times. It wasn't as clean running as prior models. This year seems to be all back to business as usual. The bike's very clean, very connected feeling at the wrist. I ran 3 different maps today, a standard map, an aggressive map that's built in the bike, and then I tried a freed up engine map that the Yamaha guys provided, which we can throw up the little image of what that map looks like here on the screen. Personally, I like the freed up one the best, just because 250, you're screaming it, you get this thing really loaded coming into the corner. I feel like the Yamaha, compared to some of its competition, has a tick more engine braking, a little bit more of a loaded feel. That freed up map just lets the whole bike feel a little bit more settled right when you chop throttle, especially when you go through a big throttle opening to full close into a harsh corner. When you ease off the throttle, not as big of a deal, but when you have to go full chop, it just kind of releases the bike and the rear end tends to settle a little bit easier. Speaking on the 2 ergo changes, the throttle tube and grip change, everybody jokes about Yamathumb, the way they changed that, we're good there. Foot peg brackets. I am very bow-legged, so when I connect with the bike with my knees, by the time my feet get to the pegs, I'm pretty wide on a foot peg, so I didn't notice the foot peg bracket last year or this year, but I've had people ride my 450RE that has the cut down mounts, and they do say it is a pretty big difference if you have your feet very tight in on the bike. It doesn't feel like you're standing on the foot peg mount quite as much anymore. Biggest change is now talking about the suspension. First thing, let's go with, if you're watching the video, we tested a little bit after this video, but Fox Raceway, a nice prep track today, little on the smooth side. We could be very aggressive, you could push really hard. Bumps were limited, but they were abrupt because it's from heavy braking, heavy moments, but not a lot of chatter. Didn't get super broken in today. So the first thing I was going off of is, how does the bike balance feel? Because I could really push my pace this morning. I feel like the balance is better than last year's bike. It's a little less teetery. The changes they have done to the shock linkage and the fork are fairly well balanced out. I really, honestly, even though I'm overweight right now for a 250, I didn't make any real changes that involved compression or anything to get hold up. I only slightly pushed the fork out from 5 mil to 2 mil just to get it a little bit longer, more delayed feel through long corners. With the fork up a little bit, it was a little too quick responding on turn-in for me. But if you listen to my videos quite commonly, I like a bike that is a little bit slower responding from entry to mid-corner. I don't like it to cut down too fast. Suspension, I was curious coming in, because if you listen to my 450 video, I talked about having to go a decent amount stiffer and then slower on rebound to get the fork to stop moving as much and feel more held up. They did a similar change to the 250 fork where they went to a delta valve. They're trying to get the fork more linear, which means it doesn't ramp up as quick. Their version in verbiage is it's not as bump sensitive. I almost say that I get what they're saying. It's not as sensitive to bumps because it doesn't ramp up as quick. To me, the delta valve is almost more bump sensitive in the fact that the suspension moves more because the setting's more linear. On the 250, it's not as noticeable because there isn't as much engine inertia as a 450. You're not braking as hard as a 450. So I actually didn't have to go really any stiffer today. If it was a little bit softer, I'd probably go a click or two, but nothing crazy. Didn't have change rebound. The balance on the fork was really good with the base clicker setting. So I was really excited about that. It had a lot of comfort, good movement. Felt really good on small chop. It wasn't too held up feeling. There's a small pressure spring change as well that's a little bit different to also get a little more hold up. Overall, fork's pretty good. Shock, new linkage ratio, has allowed for a 1 rate less. I believe we went from a 5.6 to a 5.4 shock spring. It does not make, the shock doesn't feel softer even though you're on a lighter spring because the linkage basically has less leverage against that spring rate. It has a very good initial comfort feeling being on the light spring, but it doesn't have too much leverage later on the stroke to overpower that spring. So mid-stroke on, it ramps up quite nicely. I noticed that where it was fast and open today, I could get off the back of the bike, lower the heels, pump into the rear of the bike, and really compress the rear of the Yamaha to get to track. And it never blows through, and it doesn't feel like it wallows. It settles into a nice place in like from the entry or the initial to the mid-stroke, and it stays there. It has a very good planted feel. It's very easy to steer off the back of the Yamaha 250 as you're in the faster sections and you're really trying to use your legs to compress the bike. Like I said, overall, I really didn't have to tweak much on suspension, but we did have a fairly smooth overall day. Overall, is there anything I dislike about the bike? The stock exhaust noise we've complained for years is raspy. It's a little annoying. It's especially, I actually think it sounds better standing away from the bike than seat of the pants. It's not one of my favorite sounding bikes, seat of the pants. The power on the bike, the Yamaha for the longest time was the powerhouse in this class. I still think the low to mid is really good. It's gone a little bit better up top. It's still, the Cowie, the Austrians are better up top. And the low to mid isn't quite as good as a 23. It's still a lot better than its competition. So the engine package is good overall, but I think the rest of the class is starting to catch up. The Yamaha is still super solid, and one of the biggest positives is their gear placement. Second to third to fourth feel very even. Some of your manufacturers, second to third feels like a really big gap, and then like third to fourth is really close. As dumb as it sounds like Yamaha has very simply made second to third to fourth the same gap of RPM. As simple as that sounds, they feel like they nail it best to anybody, and it gives the bike good recovery character because you never really feel, if you're in the wrong gear, it's not too far the wrong gear. Third's just close enough to second to be good, and then third's just close enough fourth to be good, and fourth is just close enough to third, if that makes sense. The only other thing I would really complain about tweaking about is I think the clutch ratio pull is not that great on this bike. The lever engages very early, very far out. It has kind of a weird engagement length. I think it engages fully too early. So I feel like I end up running a lot of slack in the clutch lever on this bike. That's one of my only complaints. I've tried a perch that had like a Honda base lever on it. That seemed to be a little bit better, but I think they could be better with their clutch lever ratio on this motorcycle. If you have any questions, any expanded thoughts you'd like to hear from me about this bike or anything specific that I spoke about, please throw it in the comments section below. I really try to get on here and answer as many tech questions as I can. I do enjoy it, so throw them in there. And if you like our content, subscribe and like, and thanks for watching.